When did your family first settle on the North Shore?
I would say, and I'm not sure about this, around 1936, 35, 36.
We were here earlier. My father's parents were here in, I think, around the turn of the century, because my father was born in 1905 in Lynn, and my mother's parents were here also around the turn of the century. All of them, I think, had come from generally Russia, Poland area, and my mother was born in Lynn in 1912.
Do you recall the reasons for their coming to the North Shore and where they settled?
I'm not sure whether my father had a factory in Lynn originally and then had to move the factory out, or had the factory out and moved it in.
Both of your families came directly to Lynn. There was no intermediate U.S. stop as far as...
I don't believe there was a mine.
I think the same.
Well, in your growing up years in Lynn, what kinds of memories stand up? What are most vivid in your mind today?
There was a kid that didn't like the idea that I was Jewish. And on the way to school, he would wait for me and beat me up.
How did that work out?
Well, it worked out well for me and not too well for him, because I went down to the end of where I lived, which was on Tudor Street in Lynn, and I had a couple of friends down there who were, a couple of acquaintances, I should say, that were tough. And I remember asking my parents, I told them what happened, and they gave me $5. I went down, and $5 was a lot of money in those days. I gave the kid $5, and he came to the Hebrew school with me one day, and the kid didn't bother me anymore.
I actually remember vividly, because we've been talking about this recently, was that the most interesting time of the week was Tuesday at 2:30, because that was early release for the Catholic students who would go to CCD. And
CCD?
It's like Hebrew school, only they didn't teach Hebrew. It was a Catholic teaching school.
There were not that many Jewish kids in the school. I don't remember. There was maybe 3 or 4 in my class.
When did things sort of change for you, insofar as the socialization, or insofar as your community activities, or whatever?
I would say that when I went away to college, I sort of lost touch with the community. I guess as most people do, except that I had my friends back here. And then when I got married right out of college, and we moved to Brookline for 2 years. I felt I had to get away from home. And then we moved back here, and the whole community had changed. Some of my friends were still here, but I made all new friends. Yeah, and by that time, Temple Israel was established, and it was very different. And Lynn was not thought of as the pits anymore. And the community continued to grow and to change.
When I grew up in Peabody, there was a very small Jewish community. This was in the mid to late 40s and into the early 50s. And Peabody was a much different city then, because at that time there was really no West Peabody. So the whole community was, I guess you'd call, downtown. And the Jewish community lived in really various parts of the city, but was a relatively small and quite close community. There were 3 synagogues, all more or less Orthodox, all in the downtown area, and a lot of Jewish businesses and Jewish businessmen of various types, some in manufacturing. Peabody was at one time the world's largest leather producing city. So there were many people who were involved in and made fortunes in the leather business, and then there were a lot of professionals and a lot of people in the retail business of every kind. Hardware stores and shoe stores and grocery stores and my father's furniture store. And so there's a variety of activities in the Jewish community and in Peabody as a whole.
Died when she was 48. This was very sad. Their house was being auctioned off. It was during the Depression, and she lay dying upstairs as the house was being
Right, say
sold.
again who this is, because I just
This is,
started.
okay, this was my mother's mother and father, Yetta and Bernard Stern, who lived on Cabot Street, right near where Sandy's Jazz Revival thing had been. They lived in a beautiful house, my mother told me, with Delft tile fireplaces and
Beverly.
in Beverly
Yeah.
on Cabot Street. And my grandfather lost everything during the Great Depression, and my grandmother died of kidney failure, which could have been taken care of today. My mother was 14 at the time, and her brother and sister were in law school. Sarah Kagan was her sister and Max Stern, and they took my mother out of high school to work to let them finish law school. Then when this was all over, my mother went back and finished high school, but then there was no money for her to go to college. She and my father were fixed up when my mother was 14, my dad was 16, in front of the Salem Shul on Essex Street by Dottie Calico. Okay. And they were, I have a diary that another cousin of my mother kept, who was very close with my mother and Archie are in every other page where they were going to parties, and they were borrowing each other's clothes because they had no money. So if one cousin was going to a party, she borrowed somebody's shoes and someone's pocketbook and stuff to go. My grandfather, Stern, never couldn't learn to read English, read or write, and my mother sent him to night school. He had no interest in the books and the stuff they were learning, and I remember his Irish teacher coming to my mother and saying, I want him to become a citizen. What can I get him interested in to read? And my mother said, the only thing he cares about is the green sheet. He goes to the racetrack all the time. And he used to take me, when I was a little kid, to the racetrack to read the green sheet to him so he knew which horse to bet on.
That's great.
So he learned to read by the green sheet. He was so excited becoming a citizen. His name was Bernard Stern, that he signed his citizenship papers, Bernard Sternard. He just kept on going, writing. That was his funny story. He never got a driver's license, but used to drive the Beverly Chief of Police around. That was part of his job.
Without a license.
And he sold bootleg liquor during Prohibition. I mean, he always lived on this side of the law, not religious at all. And he was buried on his 96th birthday. People used to ask him, Mr. Stern, what's the secret of your longevity? He would say, a schnapps in the morning, a schnapps in the evening, and only the good die young.
My father was born here and born in Salem. His family are Salem people. And my mother was born in Europe, and when she came to the United States with her 4 sisters and her mother, my grandfather had already been here for about 8 years. They settled in Peabody. And they were sort of a typical immigrant family in that, or maybe not so typical, in that my grandfather died after a year that the family was here. So that left my grandmother with 5 daughters. And she had some brothers here. and I suppose they must have been somewhat helpful to them, although none of the girls finished school. My mother was 9 years old when she came, and they all worked until they got married. And my mother married my father, and eventually they moved to Lynn.
How did the Simon family settle in Beverly?
My grandfather came from Europe, as did my grandmother, although I never knew my grandmother. And they settled in Canada for a while, and then they came to Salem. My father was born in Salem, as was all of the Simon siblings, and my mother was born in Somersworth, New Hampshire.
Now, what brought them to Salem from Canada? It's kind of long distance.
My grandfather was very interested in real estate and politics, and felt that that was where he wanted to get started.
Had he heard about it? Was there a Jewish community center? Which he
There was not a
knew
Jewish
about?
community. There was a Jewish community.
I meant a Jewish community.
There was a, for that time, there was a large Jewish community. It wasn't that large. And he got involved there, and I guess that's where he wanted to begin his career. Although he did start off, he went to Magnolia first, and I would assume that there were no Jews there in the early 1900s, and then he moved to Salem. And they lived on Lafayette Street, 3 doors down from the Salem Shul synagogue.
Yeah. And so your father was born in Salem. Your mother?
Somersworth, New Hampshire.
Oh, right. And when did they get to Beverly?
They were married in 1938, and they moved to Beverly right after they were married. And they lived in Beverly until the early 70s, when they moved to a condominium in Swampscott.
Try to be brief and sort of to the point, not wander like I tend to do, but my great-grandfather was born in 1845. I did this research in Russia, Lithuania, I think. He he had 7 children. My grandfather, being one of the younger children, who came over when he was like 10 years old in the late 1800s. Then my great-grandfather came on after that. And he lived to be, my great-grandfather, Herschel or Harris, lived to be 85 years old, and he died in the 1920s. My grandfather was born in 1880 in Lithuania near Vilna, and came to this country, came to Boston. A lot of the immigrants at that period came to Boston rather than going to Ellis Island. And they settled in Chelsea. And my grandfather had little or no education. I think he had a 5th grade education, and was basically, when he became a teenager, went to work in Boston. Actually went to work for the Oriental Tea Company, which was with that teapot used to be down by Copley Square. That was the Oriental Tea Company, and he was a shipper for them for many years. And my father was born in 1909 in Boston, in Chelsea. And eventually my grandfather moved to Lynn from Boston, and they settled in Lynn, and my father grew up in Lynn, basically. And my grandfather worked as a shipper in the Weinstein Shoe Company. That was, I don't know if anybody remembers, Connie Coleman's, this was her father, Harry Weinstein. And he had a shoe company in Lynn, and he went to work as a shipper, again, in the shoe company. And my father went to school in Lynn and then went on to college, the first person in my family to go to college. Even his brother and his sister didn't go to college, but Myron Friedman did, and actually became a professional CPA. And at that time, Lynn was a very extremely thriving community. There were many merchants in Lynn. There was, people remember some of the old stores. Brooks was there. Brooks store was there, Hoffman's. There were stores all up in Oxford Street and Monroe Street. It was a very active community. There were a lot of professional Jewish professionals in Lynn. There were other accountants, there were lawyers. There was a well-known firm, Jaffe and Toro were there. Sam Jaffe was a very well-known lawyer in Lynn, and Joe Toro became a judge. He was not Jewish, okay? But it was in those days there were combinations of Jews and non-Jews in business together. And that was happening also in the shoe business. In that period, we're talking the 40s and 50s now. And my father was now practicing as an accountant and started his own firm in Lynn as a CPA firm. And most of his accountants were in the shoe business. Lynn probably had 100 shoe factories at that time in Lynn. And then there was all the ancillary businesses. There were the companies, the shoe companies that made heels and made counters and all that, bows and ties and ribbons and all the kind of things that were with shoes. And so Myron had a lot of those were his accounts were in Lynn. And one of his accounts was the old Louis Zaga, who was Bob Lappin's father-in-law, and they had a machine shop in Lynn, which made windshield wipers. And Bob Lappin was there and was a client of my dad's, and had started the Schutzman companies out of that machine shop, which eventually moved to Salem. But there were many professionals in Lynn, professional businessmen, and lots of doctors were all in Lynn, and it was a thriving community. There were restaurants and people. Now there's one restaurant in Lynn, but there were many restaurants in those days. And eventually, Lynn was really the center of this part of the Jewish community.